Good afternoon. I want to welcome everyone to our final conversation in a series of 6 on diversity, equity, and inclusion with the Poulsbo Rotary Club. My name is Jamie Hollis. My pronouns are she and her, and I've had the privilege to help facilitate this discussion series over the last month and a half. I'm really excited today as we wrap up our conversation and our deep dives into diversity, equity, and inclusion to really have a moment to reflect back from our Rotary leaders who led our discussions, thinking about some takeaways and, really what are you going to work on moving forward? And so tonight we will begin our discussion with some of those reflections, thinking about, again, what resonated with your own session, what resonated with all of the sessions for you. What are you going to work on moving forward? And then a couple questions for our special guest speaker tonight, Dr. Raymond Reyes, who we'll introduce here in just a little bit. So with that, let's just dive right into our conversation so we can really get to the meat of it tonight. And so I will just invite in our Rotarians, starting with Kim, who led off our first session on microaggressions and building inclusion within Rotary.
Hi, Jamie.
Hey, Kim. Do you need me to recap those questions, or do you?
Oh, I thought we were going to ask them one at a time.
Let's ask one at a time. Sounds good. So Kim, again, as I just mentioned, you were the Rotarian who led our discussion on microaggressions with Dr. Roberta Wilburn and really talked about those subtle acts of exclusion and then subtle acts of inclusion. So what were your 1 to 2 takeaways from that session with Dr. Roberta?
Well, first of all, it was just a really joy for me to work with Dr. Roberta. It was really, really, really powerful. Can you hear me okay?
Yep, I can hear you great.
Okay. So a couple of takeaways for me were just what you said, that sort of the language is evolving, microaggressions, when she talked about how the word aggression inside of that might not be something that everybody can really, want to focus on, but that the language is kind of evolving to the subtle acts of exclusion. I thought that was very, very powerful. And I thought that obviously having tools that people can use when things happen, so the acronym address, being able to use that, and the things that are associated with the A, the D's, the R, the E, the SS, in order to when something happens, you can sort of work through it. So I thought those were really great. For me, as a person who shared both during the session and after the session, very personally, I think that really helping folks understand that we're all individual, we're all very unique individual people, and that it really does sometimes come down to that individual. But there are some things that sort of cross. Not every single Black person, for example, is going to be a little upset if you say you don't see their color or that kind of thing. But kind of generally speaking, it's not a good thing to do, right? So, and the one that stood out the most, that people I think had the most questions about, was the term "you are so articulate." And so I think that, just asking people to at least hear that, maybe do a little study on their own, talk to people about that. But I wanted to take just one moment, 30 seconds or so, to just sort of share why, for me and for many Black folk, that is sort of a challenging phrase. Even though it sounds really good, you want to be articulate, you want to sound good and all of that. But just to remind people that historically, Black people weren't supposed to be able to read, right? During slavery times. And so it was never intended for them to be articulate. If you know sort of some of the terminology, like Ebonics, and how people might use a word like the word ask and say ax instead, right? So there's just things that, or if you know anything about education, and that oftentimes little Black boys especially are tossed into special education because sometimes they're abstract environment that they might come up with, they might not speak or behave in a certain kind of way that's expected. So just wanted to kind of call that one out a little bit. And sometimes that "you are so articulate" comes across in a tone that is not the tone I think that the person delivering that means, but it comes across with the "so" being kind of exaggerated. And at the end, it sounds like a question. So that's why I say, am I not supposed to be? So I think that was the one that I wanted to highlight. But for the most part, it really does come down to that we're all individuals. We do things that sometimes are unintended. And the idea is that we recognize that we either share with the person that that was offensive or whatever, or that person will figure it out. But I want people to really take the I guess the initiative, learn and continue to study, and to continue to see why things are could be stated differently or handled a little bit differently. So I think in my session, those were the things that kind of stood out. But all in all, I think it was just a really great kickoff. And of course, starting something, it's a little nerve-wracking to be the first one to have to be, to lead a session. But
No pressure.
I hope folks got some really good stuff out of that.
Great. Thank you so much for sharing. And I think it really highlights the important piece of this work, and that is really separating out your intent and your impact. Exactly. And those can be two very different things. And really understanding and owning the impact is where we need to move in this work. So thank you for sharing that in your personal experience. Wondering if you could, in the next about minute or so we have left, share maybe one or two questions that you have for Dr. Reyes later on, and maybe share how you're going to stay committed into this work.
Well, I've been committed to this work well before becoming a Rotarian, 30 years of doing this work years ago. So very committed to it, but absolutely committed to doing my part to do two things. One, to continue to share and do a little bit of educating or guiding people, but also to continue to learn, right? So this is a great group to do both of those things with. I'm enjoying, stretching and learning myself as well as sharing. So that's my commitment, is to stay focused, linked arms with this Rotary group, and continue to do that. And the only question that I have for Dr. Reyes, but it's not really a question, I would just like for him to sort of punctuate the importance of this work. That's really it. I really would like him to really be able to really punctuate the importance of people to continue to learn, to continue to, and to not make this just because something happened and now it's the thing to do, but to really make this part of what we do and how we live. I would like him to really figure out how to share how important it is to really underscore the importance of learning and living DEI.
Thanks, Kim. I think that is a great question. And I'm looking forward to Dr. Raymond Reyes's answer later on, because I think that is, it's hard work. So what is going to keep us engaged and really, that impact and wanting to change our culture, and that we're in this moment. So thank you, Kim, and thank you for all that you've contributed to this session and the planning and kicking us off with that first discussion, being the first one to go out there, and also just for really authentically and with vulnerability sharing your personal experiences. I think that has been really enlightening for people who show up differently in the world. So thank you for that.
Thank you for facilitating. Really appreciate you being a part of this as well. Thank you.
Great, thank you. So let's call forward Rob Gelder next. Rob is our Rotarian that led our discussion on LGBTQ inclusion, understanding, what does that community look like, some of the dynamics around intersectionality and how that informs people's experience. So Rob, we have the same questions for you. We'll kick off with what are one or two of your takeaways that you came out of your session with that resonated?
Well, probably first and foremost, my takeaway is that I'm so glad that I had Manny as our guest that evening. He did a phenomenal job and really has a grasp on it, of the breadth and the scope of the topic. And I think really for me, the takeaway was that there is such, maybe LGBTQ plus, but there is so much gradation. There's a fluidity in the entire continuum of gender expression, et cetera. So I think that, I hope that folks really understand that. You can't just put somebody into a particular box, right? It's really about the diversity and the breadth of that. And I would say that overall, from just watching our sessions this entire time, the biggest takeaway is just the complexity of everything. And you talked about intersectionality, and it's true. There's just so many different cross sections where we are so many different things. Each one of us in our life, our lived experience, we have a lot of different things where, you know, it's just amazing. I think that it's really about how we kind of express and have those different life experiences, and you can't just by looking at somebody understand the complexity and everything that they bring forward. And I would say that for me, more than anything else, what I need to do over the next few months is I just really got a greater appreciation for what I don't know. And I'm really challenging myself to do a fair amount of a deeper dive, not only into understanding the issues, but really pushing myself and understanding my own biases that I bring to each and every experience that I have on a daily basis. And so hopefully through that, I'll be able to be a better contributor to our own conversation, both within our Rotary Club, but in the community as a whole.
Yeah. And I think that really brings up an important piece of this, is that it is so complex because we have so many intersecting identities, and we can only see very few of those on the surface. And it really highlights why this can be challenging work to understand individual experience, you know, based on that history and that complexity. What one or two questions might you have for Dr. Reyes moving forward?
Well, I think one question that jumps out for me is that I'm hoping that the series will inspire others to kind of go down this path. And so for an organization that's just starting out, what would be that best first step? How should an organization, regardless of its size, really start to do this work and be able to do it in a meaningful way so that we can make progress?
Yeah, and I think that that's a great question. And it is sometimes really hard because it is complex, and there is a lot, as you mentioned, to learn. And I think the more that I have leaned into this work, the more I realize I will never be done learning. It's just that lifetime journey. And so I think, you know, those are really important things to consider as you are really diving into this as a group. How do you make sense of where to begin in this? So,
right.
Yeah.
Lifetime learners, and in all different aspects of life. So.
Yeah. And I think one thing Manny reminded us of with this community in particular is things are evolving and changing as we have more open spaces to explore our identities. There are new ways of describing that. And what we thought was a standard maybe 5 or 10 years ago, we've learned more and we've evolved. And so just another layer of complexity of really understanding how people show up and then how to respond in an inclusive way.
Exactly.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much.
Thank you for hosting.
Oh, well, I feel like I've done the fun part, and our Rotarians and our experts really leaned into the difficult work. And knowing from talking with all of you that this is the beginning, it may be the end of our series, but it's the beginning of your work as a group moving forward. So thank you.
Thank you. It's been an honor.
All righty. So we have next up, let's call Brian Martinez up on stage. Brian led our discussion with Dr. Todd Jenkins, who is a global diversity and inclusion specialist and also a fellow Rotarian in a different district. And so we had an engaging and really impactful conversation around how Rotary can look at recruiting and really examining, right, those systems so that you can be inclusive and build that organization for everyone. So again, Brian led this conversation with our expert. And so curious, what are your one or two takeaways that you left your session kind of chewing on?
And I think much like the other hosts have said, there was so much that I took away from all of these sessions. And with my session with Dr. Todd Jenkins, I think, there was something that he said, that really stood out to me and maybe is just a really good reminder. And he said, remember that the organization did not join you, you joined the organization. And that was something that I really thought about later. And it made me really think as we are, as members, that when we made this commitment to Rotary, to join, that we really made a commitment to uphold Rotary's mission and values. And, sometimes, as we find ourselves now in this, current climate and also in this DEI space, that sometimes there can be tension or disagreements or even heated discussions, that that reminder to continue to circle back to Rotary's mission and values, because ultimately I think that really is a solid foundation for us, and also that knowing that those aren't debatable. And I think it was a really great reminder, because as you said, we're all, this is the beginning. And also there's so much work to do, and we're all learning as we go. But to really remember that we all come from different backgrounds, we all have different lived experiences, and the importance of, really listening to one another, and that it's okay, we may disagree, but that if we come back to that foundation, within Rotary and with this work with Rotary, I think that we can really move forward. So that was something that really stuck out to me. There were several things, but I came back to that over and over again afterwards.
Yeah, and to remind folks that may not have joined us for the whole session, really rooting in that four-way test as kind of those guiding questions and your North Star in this work. And I see that that just came up on screen for those who are wondering. And I think that is an important piece that you mentioned, is your organizational culture, and how you do have a culture of community service and these guiding principles that can really help lead you through some of those difficult conversations that is just inherent with this type of work.
Exactly.
Yeah, so I'm wondering, what were your maybe takeaways from the whole series, or things that you're going to lean into moving forward?
Sure. Again, I think I had so many takeaways from this series. I feel like the wealth of knowledge, that and experience that our guests shared with us was it was extensive, and it was impressive. And something that, became very clear to me as, throughout this series was just that, these are not necessarily new issues that we're dealing with. And also, the information is there's resources. And I think it really became very clear the importance of just doing the work and acting, and I know that we may say that, but it was something that, after each session, I was thinking, it made me just reflect and think, it is time to do the work and to be acting. And that was something that really stood out to me throughout the entire series.
Yeah. And I think we've certainly seen in this last year a real national reckoning with, having beliefs isn't enough, that we have to move into being anti-racist and really anti-oppression wherever we see that. And that's an active role.
Yeah.
And I think we've said and shared before that we have to know our history. We have to know how things were created, how systems were created, if we're truly going to address those.
Right.
So curious, your maybe one or two questions that you have for our guests tonight as we, look to our next chapter.
And I think it's kind of, piggybacking on to even what the other two hosts have already said. given, I think that he has extensive work kind of working with institutional diversity, and kind of much like Rob Gelder said, it would be great to just hear his input or advice for organizations, and especially maybe if we're talking about Rotary, where we do maybe at a club level have very limited resources. That resource level varies from club to club, but if they are really wanting to become more inclusive and also more competent around diversity, are there any kind of must-haves or must-dos that he would suggest that we focus on? So I would love, to hear his input and thoughts around that.
Great. Thank you. That's a great question. And I think there's a lot of organizations that are probably grappling with the same questions. How do we do this? We have very limited resources in the type of organization we are. And so I think, that will be a challenge for a lot of organizations moving forward is, how do we really engage this work with the tools that we have?
Right. Yeah. And I did want to share just real quickly, when you talk about call to action or kind of over this next 6 months, and maybe it isn't, as we know, just 6 months, this is just ongoing work. But I know even within, my Rotary Club that I belong to, I think my hope is that over this next 6 months, we can really work to get a pulse on where we are. And and again, that can be done many different ways, but I think that that's so important because that's where we have to start, even to have a starting point. And when we get that pulse, it means, really including everybody in that conversation and make sure that we're listening to each other. So whether that starts out with a survey so we can gather some information and some data, and actually be able then to kind of have more clear objectives going into those conversations. And I think that's something that I really hope to take back and to start that work. And so that we can continue to move forward and, not just in our Rotary world, but in our, personal and professional life. But that is something, in regards to kind of that call to action, that is my hope to do that.
And I think that's you bring up something important, and that's, having the mirror that reflects, where you are. And being a membership organization, every member is going to experience that quite differently. Yes. And making sure, as you mentioned, everybody's voice is being heard and every person's experience is being understood with how they're engaging your club. So, yeah, great questions. I'm sure there'll just be a very easy answer to all of those. We've solved it all, but I know that Dr. Reyes certainly has guidance and has done this work for a long time that can lead us on a path of what will truly engage us in this work moving forward.
Sure. Thank you, Jamie, and thank you so much for your facilitation and being here with us. It's been wonderful. So thank you.
Well, thank you. It's been my gift. This is my life's work and very personal to my family. So I do have a stake in making sure this world, is better for my own family. So
well, I appreciate it.
Thank you. So let's now welcome our last Rotarian that led a conversation, and that is Dan Whedon. He led our conversation on beginning to dismantle racism by examining the creation of whiteness and understanding some of that history. So Dan, we have same questions for you, beginning with what were one or two of your takeaways from the session that you had with Dr. McMullen on whiteness?
Well, Jamie, I think if I were only to pick two, because like everybody else, I'd probably have about a gazillion of them. The first one was when he said this specifically: whiteness isn't a problem for white people. And that really hit me. He used an example of a sock drawer. Whiteness isn't a problem for white people, and that we have uncritically bought into the concept of whiteness. And even in my recent work in studying in this, that for whatever reason, that resonated with me deeply. The other was at the end of the conversation, we talked about the discovery of our other heritage, that the concept that whiteness is a non-culture. And that, in fact, I think you said this as part of it, that we lost our immigrant story by becoming white. And so I thought that that was really an important concept that came out of his book, and that there's a way that we can actually rediscover many cultures that we might actually have in our background. So I think that the concept of whiteness isn't a problem for white people. Being critical about that, and then really looking at our other heritages that we can draw from.
Yeah. And, I really want to thank, the Rotary Club and all of you that put together this series, because this is the most difficult conversation to have, and the one generally we least like to engage with, but the one that's needed more than ever right now.
Indeed, I agree.
So, leaning into that discomfort, not only, leading the discussion, but the work that you have outlined, for the club is hard but necessary. And I'm just very grateful that you're leaning into this conversation that's really, needed at this time. Curious if you had one or two takeaways on this series, or wanted to talk about what you're going to personally work on moving forward.
Well, I guess both. I'm going to give you, there's so much on the series, but there was one topic that for me was a thread throughout, and I didn't know about it before. So I thought this was something exciting and new for me to understand. And that's the concept of intersectionality. It really started with Dr. Roberta, but it played out with Dr. Todd and with Manny and with Dr. Terry. There was this intersectionality concept. That was a big one for me. And so I could go on and on about a whole lot of different ones, but I think when we look down at how we all are different, but how we're all the same, and the concept of empathy amongst all of us, because we all have some of the same and similar values and similar backgrounds, but we're all different. And I just found that to be really interesting. And I actually have two questions for Dr. Reyes. Number one is, because I think we're always looking at trying to create measures and metrics. How do we best measure ourselves and our club improvement? So as I'm looking at it as a club level, and we're going to say, hey, these are some of the goals that we have. How can we actually measure those? Because you asked about me, I want to continue to improve, but I'm not so sure I know how to measure that. So I'd really like to get some insight on that. And then the second question is, along those lines, how can we best critically look at our own deep-seated biases that we have ourselves? So if I've got to be less, or I've got to be more critical about how I'm looking at things, I've got to start with me. So I'm looking about measures and metrics, and then critically looking at our own biases.
Yeah. That great questions, and I know we'll have great answers for that. And I do think you hit an important point, that sometimes we don't have the mirror to know where we are, or that tool to really concretely know that we're gaining new skills. And really, this is what this work is about, is being able to have more tools that are in that tool belt. So when we're working across people who have different experiences and might look at us, but because of those intersections might really experience the world quite differently, that we have those tools that we can pull off of, right? Pull from, so that we can understand the other and engage in a dialogue that is, restorative and focused on justice. So, right. Great questions.
Thank you. And I know I'm going to be popping back at the end, and I'm going to thank you more then. But again, to echo everybody else, thank you for your work in bringing these great guests to us.
My pleasure. And I'll just share with everyone, these guests are people that I've personally learned from. I've had the benefit of either working with or being in different environments where they have been quite a gift to me. And so I'm very happy that I was able to share their expertise with Rotary. They have definitely made a huge impact in my life, including our special guest speaker tonight. We will invite Dr. Raymond Reyes up to the stage. I would like to just briefly kind of read your bio so folks have an understanding of your work and what you've been involved with, and then we can dive into our conversation.
Okay.
So Dr. Reyes currently serves as the Associate Vice President for Cultural Initiatives in the Office of the President for Gonzaga University. He's previously served as the Associate Provost and Chief Diversity Officer, and as the Interim Director for Gonzaga University's Center for Global Engagement, and the Interim Director for the Unity Multicultural Education Center, which we call UMEC. Prior to these administrative appointments, he was an assistant professor in the School of Education at Gonzaga and has worked in many other areas of teaching over his years at Gonzaga. Prior to coming to GU, he served as the administrator directive for the Coeur d'Alene Tribe of Idaho. He has 35 years of experience in Indian education and professional development training. Raymond has conducted hundreds of trainings and technical assistance seminars throughout the United States, Kenya, South Africa, Zambia, Malawi, Zimbabwe, Mexico, Colombia, and Canada. His areas of scholarship and expertise are the spiritual significance of human difference, social justice and diversity education, campus climate assessments and program evaluations, and optimizing organizational performance through intercultural competence and multicultural literacy. He has done lots of consultation work, both on professional development seminars and looking at processes within organizations. He's worked with hospitals, schools, businesses, churches, and a diverse number of government agencies. He was the founding member of Washington State's Department of Social Health and Services Region 1 Indian Child Welfare Advisory Council and was instrumental in the implementation of the Indian Child Welfare Act, which is ICWA for the Spokane regional area. He's the founding board member also of Gonzaga University's Institute for Hate Studies, and he's also a founding member of Spokane County's Human Rights Task Force. On a personal note, Raymond became a licensed foster parent and adopted 3 Native American children. He's the proud father of a 30-year-old son, a 28-year-old daughter, a 21-year-old son, and a 3-year-old grandson. He says that these 4 angels hiding in full view are the master teachers in his life who offer critical lessons on what it means to be human. So with that, Dr. Reyes, I want to welcome you. For those that don't know, I had the great opportunity of working for about 4 years with you at Gonzaga and worked on a lot of those areas that you started at the university. And if I'm right, you've been there, is it for about 27 years?
33.
33 years.
Going on 34.
So you have certainly seen a lot of evolution, a lot of change over that time. And so I'm excited to have you here because you've done a lot of work around racial equity and inclusion and really understanding, how these systems impact individuals. And so let's dive into our questions. I'm going to just pull them up here.
Okay.
So let's start with, for an organization that is just starting down this path, that, maybe a year ago, members had never heard of white privilege, but were deeply impacted by what we saw with the George Floyd killing. For an organization that's really wading into this for the first time, what is their best first step for engaging in this work in an authentic way?
Okay, thank you. Well, first of all, thank you for providing me this opportunity. And I'm deeply touched by this group and the courage that it's taken to do what they've done. James Baldwin once said that Not everything we face will change, but nothing changes until we face it. And it takes courage to face things that make you uncomfortable and intentionally get out of your comfort zone. So kudos to all of you, this community, this organization, for being able to do that, this series.
Yeah.
So what I've learned in all these years that I've been doing this work is commitment from the top. Yeah, as much as we want to believe that things flatten out and we're collaborative and we don't resemble the U.S. military or churches and organizations that are very truncated and top-down in nature, most organizations are. And so those with the most power and privilege have to have the commitment. So commitment from the top. And then because of that, very quickly, I'll microwave this, I think there needs to be some sort of organizing entity that is what I'll call the brain trust or the heart trust, that does the discerning, the planning, the evaluation, a diversity council, a board, some entity that's responsible for the strategic thinking in the area of inclusion and equity, and also developing a plan with metrics for accountability. One of your hosts talked about values and mission. So tying, because the commitment from the top and having this kind of this central organizing entity that represents the universe, the organization responsible for doing its vision making and setting goals based on values. And most importantly, in the word evaluation is the word value. What you value is what you evaluate. So here again, having an organized framework to keep the organization, have fidelity to this commitment. Those things are important. And then part of the plan has things related to what I call PET. It's about people, environments, and tasks. So the people part is the investment in ongoing professional education, professional development, how you hire, recruit, hire, and retain, all that whole area of workforce development. And environment is the climate. One of your hosts talked about climate assessment or the culture of the organization and being able to track if it is inclusion and equitable. I've often said that diversity is a matter of fact, inclusion is a practice, and equity is a goal. So commitment from the top, having a group of people that represent a deep diagonal slice of the organization, involved with being the brain trust and the heart trust, having a roadmap, as you said, defining true north. What is the North Star? Holding yourself accountable and knowing that you're moving, that you're making progress. So I mean, that's a whole lot, but I think it all begins with commitment from the top. And then from there, because this work is about relationship to power and privilege, let's just call it out. That's what it is. So why not just claim it from the get-go and be able to draw that circle larger to include those? So it's not going to be this creative tension that it's always around who authorizes, who approves. You have the people at the highest level of governance and authority. You know, in the word authority is the word author. You want to have the people who have the power and the privilege to do authorship with changing the story of an organization. And so that authority is essential, that buy-in for the ownership.
Yeah. And I think that with our group here, because they're so focused in service to community and that 4-way test, that they have some natural cultural ways of being that really aligns with this work, that can help them as they're really engaging to, as you say, find that North Star and to guide them into this. I'm curious, a follow-up question to that. What is the best measure for ourselves or in our club for improvement? How will we know when we get better? And then how can we critically look at our own deep-seated biases?
Measures, first of all, let me back up a little bit. Further upstream would be define equity for this group. What does equity mean? What does inclusion mean? So you begin with the end in mind. You go ahead and graph a description of the promised land. What in the ideal world, what does inclusion look like? In the ideal world, what does equity look like? Dare to dream, be bodacious, be bold, do that. And then once you know that, then you're tracking equity gaps. What is versus what should be. It's a simple gap analysis that a lot of people do. in strategic planning in the area of inclusion and equity. But I think it's really important first to do the discernment around how are you using these words and what do these words uniquely mean to this organization. That's very important, because then you're creating a benchmark, you're creating a compass or a dashboard in terms of this is where we are, or not only that, you talked about history, remembering who we are, and remembering how the past influences the present. Where have you been? Where are you? And where do you want to go? What's the ideal? And then I think then you begin creating indicators of movement and success and progress over that continuum. So I think that's at measuring improvement at the macro level, the organizational level. Self-improvement requires self-reflection. And I think, and that is, you've mentioned it before in our conversations around cultural humility, empathy, the potency of emotional intelligence. I think there's a interesting convergence and synergy of intercultural competence, intercultural fluency, whatever you want to call it, emotional intelligence, spiritual literacy, and multiple perspectives, kind of intellectual development. And so I simplify it. What I try to self-regulate in myself is something that I found back in the far east in terms of some of the theologies around asking 3 questions, and then you can do the discernment on whether you're inclusive or equitable. Is it kind? Is it necessary? Is it truthful? It goes back to the implicit bias and microaggression sessions that you did. I mean, really interrogating one's intentions, interpretations, and impacts, really impacting that and unpacking that at a very personal level. So I ask myself, whenever I catch myself, saying something that it already got out of my mouth, and I know I can feel the energy that I blew it. I just, guilty as charged. But then the recovery is, well, because it was not kind, or it wasn't truthful, or it wasn't necessary. If I can say yes to those 3 questions, is it kind, is it necessary, is it truthful? Then I know I'm being impeccable with my word, thought, word, and deed. If I'm not, then I'm not treating people the way I want to be treated. It goes back to that golden rule premise. Yeah. So later, if we have time, really talking about the spiritual significance of human difference. And I'm not talking about religion. I'm not talking about theological, evangelism. I'm talking about matters of spirit that transcend human-made interpretations of God, she, he, or it, and religion. And believe me, human difference is central to that idea of what does it mean to be human, and what does it mean when I talk about the spiritual significance of human difference. Here again, not talking about organized religion, not talking about theological argumentations around God and how God is defined, but really talking about quality of life, and making sure that the gift of life is honored and people have equal access and equitable opportunity to enjoy the gifts and abundance of life.
Yeah, I think that, you've hit on so many important things. And I think things that we have talked about previously in the series that are so important. And I think you hit one of the first things on the head with, a lot of times we talk about diversity and we want our organizations to be diverse, but we stop at that. And really defining what diversity is and how that's different from inclusion really is instrumental in guiding your actions. And so, we've talked about in our series that, diversity is being asked to the party, inclusion is being asked to plan the party.
Exactly.
And so, no, go ahead.
No, it's just that it reminds me of Martin Luther King one time when he said, it just amplified what you just said. He said, it's one thing to have the right to sit at the counter at the the Woolworths or the old days where they had kitchen, these counters at the cafe. So having the right to sit at the cafe, but if you don't know how to read, you can't read the menu. And if you don't have a job, you don't have money in your pocket, so you can't pay for the meal. So there's an intimate relationship between human rights, literacy, and then economic imperatives that make it opportunities for people to live a life that they want. Freedom, have freedom of choice. And so you're right about that, is that diversity is a matter of fact, and then intersectionality really makes it more complex. And someone once told me that a stroke of genius is to simplify great complexity without distilling it or diluting it in any way, you know? And so the idea that inclusion is a practice and equity is a goal, I think helps scaffold those ideas. And then I think also with intersectionality, it's important to understand also that comes out of critical race theory, what's called interest convergence. So not only understanding, you know, that there's 6.8 billion people speaking over 6,000 languages on this planet, and they all have intersectionality going on. I mean, so it gets real complex really fast. But knowing that, it's having that sensitivity, but also out of critical race theory, in addition to intersectionality, comes out this idea of interest convergence. Mm-hmm. So how do we know similarities and understand differences? How do we bilocate our consciousness? And it's not a binary either or proposition, but here again, we understand the similarities, the universality of the human experience, and also we understand and know the differences, both at the same time, because we're not all the same, but we don't want exaggerated extreme differentiation either, because that undermines the premise of community. So we want both. We boldly want both.
Yeah. And, you know, I think you brought up something that we didn't talk in depth about, and that's critical race theory. And so knowing that there are numerous bills being proposed to outlaw teaching critical race theory as being disruptive, which we could argue that's the point of it.
Yes, it is.
So, you know, with that now kind of in our news cycle, and we see attacks on this, my guess is a lot of people that don't kind of live in these worlds full time don't really know what that means. And so we can be highly influenced by kind of the dialogues that are happening out there about what this means. So could you share just a little bit of what that is at the heart of it?
I think, first of all, this work is about compassion and caring. It really is. And I think that how can we transcend our certainty and our judgment? How do we do that, but yet still stand firm with a backbone of belief and conviction? And so to me, it's meeting people where they are, meeting them where they are. When I first came to Spokane, the Aryan Nations and Richard Butler was in northern Idaho, and I was living in Spokane at the time. And I got the job at Gonzaga. In 1988, I came in 87, 88. I sat on a panel with him. This guy is self-professed racist, Aryan Nations, white supremacy, the whole thing. And really not wanting to react to him, but meet him where he is. I wasn't totally successful with that, but my point in telling you this story is that there's a head, heart, and hands quality to this work. There is the cognitive, a checkup from the neck up, and people can live there forever and argue about critical race theory and that should not be part of the curriculum or whatever. There's also the intelligence of the heart, and there's also the experiential, the hands-on, the action. The premise of this session is, okay, what next? Action steps, which is beautiful because you filled your head with information, you filled your heart with insight and empathetic knowingness, and now it's about action, to know, to care, to act. And so I think that how do we get out of the head, and how do we try to navigate this creative tension between us against them? It really is the invitation to transcend the binary and go beyond the either or proposition to the end both. What would, and to me, it's essential in this country right now with the racial reckoning. And I had a friend one time, very quickly, said, remind me, and this was beautiful. He said, we have a Statue of Liberty on the East Coast. We ought to have a Statue of Responsibility on the West Coast. Because if we're truly going to have an authentic multicultural democracy, this country was founded on racism, oppression, extermination, and cultural genocide. Let's face it. But that's okay. It's okay in terms of if we don't deny it, we have to face it. And I think that what you said earlier about it's disturbing, it's interesting. Here's another James Baldwin thing. I've been reading James Baldwin lately. That's why he's kind of seeping out of me right now. He said, you know, the what an educator is. The educator is a disturber of the peace. Who wants that kind of person around? You know, I often say that learning begins where our comfort zone ends. If we really, I used to have a podcast, and I turned it over to the new CDO. I established it last year. It's called Intercultural Yoga, because this work stretches us. Intercultural yoga, we stretch ourselves in ways that we've never done before. And not only that, yoga is about breathing. And so inhaling certain information and exhaling certain action and certain behaviors, and breathing into parts of our consciousness, of our lived experience that we've never done before. Because no one's ever questioned, asking the right question, no one's ever questioned our assumptions about why we know what we know, or why we think we know what we know. That sounds like psychobabble, but you know, it's this notion of asking the right question for ourselves. You know, yeah. I think that's where we meet people where they are. There's no coincidence that a question mark resembles an inverted plow, breaking up the hard soil of old beliefs, expectations, and assumptions, and preparing the ground for new growth and development. Saul Alinsky said that in 1971 in a book called Rules for Radicals, when he talked about the question. It's about, you know, Einstein said this: you can't solve a problem on the same level in which it was created. We have to transcend the trance that we're in and have the courage to ask questions that upset the status quo and introduce another way of thinking through consensus reality.
Yeah, that, you know, brings to mind the work of Audre Lorde.
Mm-hmm.
And
yes.
Kind of a seminal idea is that you cannot undo the master system with the master's tools.
Yes.
And so could you just explain what she means by that statement?
I think what it takes, you know, you've heard this before, maybe, is this idea of today's science fiction is tomorrow's science. Where the mind goes, the body follows. Right now, you know, you're thinking 1,700, 1,800 words a minute, because you're thinking in words, pictures, and feelings. I can talk maybe, you know, I don't know, 200 words. I can talk fast, but I can't talk as fast as you think, you know. So this idea of imagining, in Greek, the word, this is what happens when you hang out with Jesuits. They mess you up smart. There's some people that know a little about a lot, and there's others that know a lot about a little. And, you know, I love the morphology, the origin and meaning of words. And image in Greek means a moment's intuition into reality. And so we think in words, pictures, and feelings. And so we are the author and producer and director of our lived experience or our life drama. Someone once told me that life is a metaphor for group therapy. You know, well, what better way to experiment with our health and wellness through dealing with issues of racism, exclusion, and oppression? I mean, if that's not a test of what it means to be human, I don't know what is. I think that God, he, she, and her, in its infinite wisdom, understood clearly that culture is a way of life that allows us to walk the spiritual path with practical feet. And diversity, its very nature, and our reaction to that nature is the living curriculum that we learn to master the lessons of love and service, that we spiritualize our consciousness. And I think that's what she was talking about in terms of this idea that, you know, you can't use the master's tool to correct or change or improve the tool or the design. Everything needs another evolution or revolution of thought. And we do that together in community, synergistically. You know, right now, and even in this conversation, you've made me think about things I've never thought about before. This idea that no person is an island unto themselves is essential. We need each other. We're wired for community. We raise the collective IQ by having informed dissent. That's what Gandhi called, you know, the British call it loyal opposition. You know, how can we have what we had this last election and still be a United States of America? How can we do that? That's the promised land for this country.
Yeah, and it reminds me, we've spoken a bit in this series and some other opportunities with Rotary that our very existence is tied into this. Our democracy
yes.
tied into this. And so it's not only about recognizing and honoring individuals, but it's the very viability of us to finally, I think, as you mentioned, to reconcile the original sin, that we have not come to terms with that, and that we've all been shortchanged in the education that was presented to us. And we all have big gaps because of that.
Well, and how do we heal and reconcile all this without blame, victimization, or guilt? See, this is the transcendent moment. How can we get to that point where we can do everything you've described, which is essential, without reacting with blame, victimization, or guilt? How can we learn to listen better? See, that's the first act. I should have answered that question. Listen. What's the first step for anybody to listen, learn, listen? Because I think one time somebody told me, said, only speak if you think you can improve the silence. I had a 19-year-old cat that died last year, by the way. And you know what I named that cat? That cat's name was Listen. Because when I got that cat 19 years ago, I had gotten divorced, and I was lamenting the fact, of what went wrong, what I did and didn't do. And I realized that I just didn't listen. And so I got this little kitty cat when I moved into my apartment by myself, and I named the little kitty cat Listen. And for 19 years, that cat lived with me and reminded me every time I said its name, what I think is important to elevate my spiritual consciousness and my ability to accept others who are different than me is the ability to listen. Because that's the doorway, that's the invitation, that's the portal, I think, to empathy and to humility and to lifelong learning. And wow, boy, I mean, when you do that, all kinds of things start happening in your life.
Yeah, that something that Ron Sims said recently. Ron has done a lot of work. He's from Spokane, a lot of work around our state. I have the privilege of having him be our board chair where I work full time. And he was asked a similar question, and he said, listen and believe people of color when they tell you what they're experiencing.
Yes, good. Yeah.
And I think, we might listen, but sometimes, we can second guess, and we can say, what about, did you think it was this? And that for those of us that, walk with privilege, that we just need to listen and believe the experiences people are sharing with us so that we can understand our part of that, and then how we move forward in a truly inclusive, racially dynamic democracy in our country.
I think so. And I think when sometimes people accuse me of being idealistic and I'm not very practical, and, I'm full of words and all that, and guilty as charged, I guess that's true. But I also think that, if I had a rubber band right now, you could probably see my two thumbs. The upper thumb, I would say, is the ideal, and my lower thumb holding a rubber band would be the real. And I think where we're uniquely positioned right now is to create the gravitational force of the ideal to be stronger than the real. So the real will match up and come up to the ideal. And vice, we don't want reality, the harsh elements of reality, to bring down our aspirations. And I think it's okay. St. Ignatius of Loyola was the founder of the Society of Jesus, the Jesuits, and he was often characterized as being a practical visionary. So I think we need people that imagine and dream, and we need people that are practical. We need people that fly kites, but also drive nails, terraform on feet, on ground, but head in clouds. We need both, the ideal and the real. We need rhetoric, we need reality, we need it all. And that's why it takes partnership, and it takes community and service. I love the values of the Rotary Club in terms of its service, its sense of altruism, its sense of living for something beyond themselves. That's beautiful, because that's the golden moment when all kinds of magical things can occur.
Yeah, and I think we're getting close to the end of our time. I could talk for another hour or two with you, Raymond, and pick your brain. But I think that's a great place to end our part of the discussion, that Rotary does so much good in their community, and they're full of good people who, love their community and want to make it a better place. And so I think, this group at this time is somebody that can really be a leader in your communities to show what's possible. And that, we're all facing a very similar challenges, no matter what kind of organization we're in, that we have changing dynamics. And if we want to stay relevant and really stay in existence, we have to figure this piece out in a changing world of how we bring more folks in an authentic and inclusive way. So with that, Dr. Reyes, again, thank you so much for your time tonight. As I shared with folks, I had the privilege of working at Gonzaga for about 4 years. And I've shared with other people, I was always asking, don't make me speak before Dr. Reyes, because that's just too much pressure. And so just been instrumental in just my own life, personally and professionally, and grateful for the gift that you give our communities.
Thank you so much. I appreciate it. Thank you. You're a blessing. Thank you.
Thank you. So with that, we're going to invite Dan back on. We just have a couple more minutes until we wrap. I know we're a little bit past 5, but Dan would like to share with those that are with us today what the next 6 months for Rotary looks like.
First of all, Jamie, I have to say I'm speechless, and that takes some doing. Just listening to that last 30 minutes, I'm literally speechless, and I think I've gotten some new ideas about what we're doing next, just listening to Dr. Reyes. So first of all, on behalf of our club, on behalf of our working group, and on behalf of our president, Nick Johnson, and President-elect Donna Pledger, we want to thank all of you who are watching, whether you're watching live, whether you're watching later, whether you're watching us over and over again, regardless. Thank you for investing your time into education and learning and these discussions. We're coming back in 6 months, because when we're talking about measures and metrics of success, we want to find out what's going to happen. And so if you go to our website, which is if you go to Poulsbo Rotary Club, I think Nick is going to put it up, poulsborotaryclub.org, DEI Series, you can see not only all of these episodes again, but you're going to be able to keep track of when in 6 months we're coming back, what we're likely to do. Please subscribe to our mailing, because we're going to have information about that. And, I think for me as an individual Rotarian and for us as a club, we have some conversations that have come out of this that we're going to have to tackle, and we're going to go with the end in mind. Just like Dr. Ray said, we got to figure out that end in mind and go from there. And with that, Jamie, I do not only want to thank you, but I also want to encourage you to talk a little bit about some of the assessments. There's that darn alarm again. Sorry about that. It must be 5:03. To talk about some of the measurables and the assessments that you have and will make available. But again, thank you from the bottom of my heart, and that heart includes the Poulsbo Rotary Club. Your help, your vision, your energy, your contacts, everything about how you've helped us. You put service above self, and for that we are truly grateful.
Thank you. It's really truly been my pleasure getting to know all of you. As you know, Kim and I have known each other for quite a while and invited me in to this project, and I've been just grateful to be able to give service to something I really believe in. So thank you for the opportunity. So one thing that I'll mention that Dan had shared is an instrument called the Intercultural Development Inventory. I know Dr. Reyes is also very familiar with this. It is an instrument, really that mirror to help us understand where we are in our own skill development. And then we have the ability to look at you all as a group. And so I have offered the Rotary Club to keep working with them over the next 6 months to help administer some of these assessments and to help look at how we implement the tools that we've learned about, so that in 6 months we have a great report out of some real concrete progress that we've made as an organization. Again, looking very critically first at ourselves and then at our organization and what we need to do to become more inclusive, not only to our existing members, but those potential members that we hope to recruit in the future. So Dan, I know you popped off. If there's anything else you'd like me to share, I'm happy to, but I also know we are keeping people beyond our hour. So, all right. So I think I got the "it's a wrap" sign behind the scenes. So folks, again, thank you very much for joining us today. I do also want to thank all of our guest speakers that just lended their expertise and their time and talent for our benefit and our personal development. Remind folks that you can watch all of these series. They will be up on the website that you see below on the screen, and that this is the beginning of our work and not the end, and that we will stay engaged in it and come back in 6 months with some really concrete report outs of what we've done with everything that we've learned in the last 6 weeks. So with that, I will call it a wrap. And again, thank you all. Appreciate your engagement and support of this work.